I'm interested to know what the first movie was that changed your life and made you decide this is what I want to do with my life.
Wow. Well, there's almost a couple of layers to that. I can tell you I can tell you the hour probably that I decided I wanted to actually go ahead and commit to making movies. And that was it would have been June 5th, 1975, at about 11:30 in the morning, which was the first day first showing of Jaws.
Wow.
And I had talked my father into dropping me off at a movie theater which was downstairs in Century City here in LA, which was this cavernous place called the Plit, which hadn't been split up into smaller screens at that point. And I was 11, and I got probably 15 minutes into the movie and didn't know if I was even going to make it. I was so freaked out, but stayed with it. I kept looking. It was the first show, so there were actually not that many people there yet. And I kept looking up and down these huge. They had it was like an early theater for like airline style seating, these big seats. And I just kept looking right and left to see if I had any company, because I truly was freaked out. But by the time it was done, it was the first time I ever had a sense of a hand, like literally guiding me through an experience, and beyond just being kind of taken by a movie. I was like, man, who has that job? Because I felt it very cognizantly, and literally went home that weekend, stole my father's Super 8 camera, and started shooting.
But what a gift that is! What a gift to have that moment of epiphany where you knew this is for me.
This is the thing. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny because at that age, I look back now and I fully agree with you. It was a gift. At the time, you felt a little bit like a mutant because, you know, I did play soccer, but other than that, I just started making movies, and so everybody else had a lot more ranging interest than I was. The guy who was always just disappearing to go shoot Super 8 movies on Ventura Boulevard. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear that Jaws, you know, really the original blockbuster. I had dinner the other night with one of the directors of The Shark Is Still Working, a documentary about Jaws, and that's all we talked about the other night was Jaws, and just its effect and its influence. It's amazing.
And I mean, I'm telling you, the number of filmmakers, if they cop to it, I mean, Steve Soderbergh is a friend of mine. Soderbergh, that was a formative movie for Steve. I mean, it's like the number of filmmakers who will actually, if it wasn't the moment in the film, it certainly is in the canon of the early films that just emblazoned, you know, itself into their brains. And that's I think it's on account of the visual storytelling in that movie, in the sense of, like I say, a hand. I mean, granted, Verna Fields was a brilliant editor, but that it was in the footage and it was in the performances and the shark not working, which was genius. So
it really was.
You know what really strikes me about you when I review your resume, it's difficult to pigeonhole you, because on the one hand, you've obviously got the big studio films. You've got Casper and Lemony Snicket and The New Land of the Lost, and then more kind of intimate films like Moonlight Mile and 10 Items or Less.
Yeah.
So when you were dreaming of a career in film or working towards that goal, what did you perceive as your desired identity as a filmmaker?
Well, I think what's interesting, and it probably accounts for the true psychosis of that resume, is that it wasn't like I know I have friends who always dreamed of going off to, you know, before Tim Burton did it, to go make Batman. I had friends who did have really specific sort of genre dreams, and I think back to even the Super 8 films that I made. I made everything from a James Bond movie to an intimate drama. I think I really was always just interested in whatever story was kind of guiding me along, you know, pulling me by the nose in a given week, and that holds true to this point. I mean, that's my favorite moment. I'm just about to start the junket process, and my favorite moment is, you know, and now they've stopped saying it. They used to say, "Wow, it's a real departure for you," and I just crack up. I'm like, "You can't say that anymore because you tell me what I'm departing from." So
exactly,
you know, yeah, and that is the case. I tend to surface, especially from the larger, you know, I literally just finished the movie 2 days ago, and it was not quite 2 years, but just like 2 months shy of a 2-year experience, and I tend to surface, and then just, often that's why you'll see that rhythm in the filmography there of going from large to intimate. I mean, 10 Items or Less was a film that we went off and did in 14 days, and it was one of the most pleasurable experiences I've ever had. And and it's not a coincidence that it came right after spending a couple of years on Lemony Snicket. And so I think, for me, that I've gone back to teach a little bit at UCLA in the grad school, my alma mater, and the kids are always fascinated by defining. By defining power and success, and truly, power is just creative power. You want the freedom to go choose to do whatever you want to do and not have anybody question it. And if you can kind of buy yourself that kind of freedom. I don't care if you call it power, you just call it, just a great gift to be able to pursue the things you want to pursue. That's what you shoot for.
Right.
That would have to. Right. That would have to be the ultimate luxury for an artist, that freedom.
Yeah. Exactly. You just want them saying, oh, hey, now wait a second, you've never gone off into this territory. How do we know? How do we know you can work on this budget, or how do we know that you can work with this talent, or how do we know that your script's not going to fall apart? All those sorts of things. And so it is fun to keep everybody guessing, but it's not calculated. It's pretty much just wherever my interests are in a given period of time.
Yeah. You mentioned the process, the 2-year process to get this on the screen, the Land of the Lost. Tell me how that started. Was it in the conceptual stage when you came aboard? How did that work?
It was very nascent. Yeah, what happened was the Crofts, I learned a lot about this after the fact. Sid and Marty had been trying to, well, they'll tell you they've been trying to get the movie going for 30 years since since the show had wrapped up.
Yeah, for as long as
I believe it. I mean, they are forces of nature. But what's interesting is I think it was in development at Disney at some point, and even at Sony. But I think in those phases, it was, if you will, truest to the series form, which was a very earnest sort of. I don't even know what they were doing, but I think they were trying to do an earnest version of a feature family film, and I hadn't heard about its existence. And with me, it was more kismet. Will Ferrell, an old acquaintance, and we've always been friendly, had never worked together. And I was writing a new original, again, much more sort of an intimate kind of character comedies 2 years ago, and bumped into him and said, hey, let's grab lunch. And so we had lunch. This was like he was finishing semi-pro, I think. And we had lunch, and ostensibly I was going to give him a little heads up as to what I'm writing. And he was really funny at the top of our lunch. He said, okay, I know you came talking about something, but I'm going to totally hijack the lunch. I really want to go off, and we just got we got effectively the rights via the Crofts to go do Land of the Lost. We have like a first pass on a script. It's not there, but we'd love to do this with you. And like I said, I didn't even know that the project was out there in the ether. And for me, what was interesting was I had not, I didn't have, which I of course now do, thanks to Sid and Marty, I didn't have my little Rhino DVD collection. I last left the show in my pajamas back in 1975.
Right.
And so, which was all the better because I only had the memories of mine that had lasted 35 years.
Right.
And that all the details or lack thereof. But the minute Will told me that, and I said to him, I said, okay, well, if what you're saying is take the best elements that we can recall, but then go off and do basically a comedy with a sensibility that pleases us, I'm there in a heartbeat. And that's exactly what they were hoping to do. So I went off and I dreamed up, I took a look at the material that they had. Chris Henchy and this really terrific guy, Dennis McNicholas, who used to run the writing staff at SNL, had gone to work on a draft, and there were some really great ideas. It was a little all over the place, and so I came back and sort of said to Will and Jimmy Miller, his manager and producer, I said, well, first of all, this thing, there's an attraction to the idea of going and doing your Harryhausen animation and some puppetry and really having a great time, that's the Cross. I said, the problem is that'll last about 8 minutes. It'll be a really good SNL sketch. If you're going to do it, the funniest thing you can do is actually commit to a fairly lethal world where the dinosaurs, if you will, are actually photorealistic, and they are badass. And you kind of get to expand on what was the conceptual idea of the world in Land of the Lost, but don't patronize it. Actually, go for it. And then it's the behavior of these characters in that situation that will make for the comedy. But you really commit to it. And I did that even with the score. Michael Giacchino, who's a fantastic composer and a friend of mine, I bumped into him as I was deciding to make the movie. And once again, he said to me, what are you working on? I said, well, your ears are burning. I was going to give you a ring. I think I'm going to do Land of the Lost. And he literally throttled me. He was like, you have to let me do that movie. It was his favorite show when he was a kid with his brother. And I said to him, but the only thing we got to commit, I said, it's got to be like a Jerry Goldsmith score from 68 to 71, fully hyper adventure, kind of right back to the Planet of the Apes vibe.
Right.
And that will, instead of doing a comedy score, you go that way, and it'll actually only drive home more how the behavior of your characters actually is. And that's exactly what we did. So so it all started, back whatever it was. I think I started in earnest working with the writers in July of 07.
Wow.
And just went from there, kind of laid it all out for the studio, told them which sound stages they were going to have to book immediately, and to their credit, they went for it.
Wow. Jerry, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just curious, because we were talking about this at my job earlier today. Where you obviously you wanted to make it, you are aiming for a more comedic tone than the series.
Mm-hmm.
So the series, there are a couple of series. There's 2 original series, and then there was one they remade in the 90s, I remember, for a little bit. But you're obviously going with Will Ferrell and Danny McBride, 2 of the funniest actors today, a very slapstick comedy in some ways. But I was wondering, were there any other, these recent comedy shows that have been made into movies, like the Brady Bunch, where they sort of it was a parody of the TV show? Did you ever think about going that approach, or? We
didn't, only because it didn't seem necessary. Again, I think a lot of, not counting the Brady Bunch movie because it's sort of a different attack, but I think in general a lot of parodies for me run out of gas about, even if they're great, you're 2 reels in and you're done.
I think usually after the opening credits.
Well, yeah, exactly, because you get the tonal joke, and it's all right, great, and then, oh, shit, we got to sit through 90 minutes of this. And so
exactly, you're right.
Oh, man. So that never struck us, and partly because I think we also didn't want to make a dangerous assumption, and that is that, there's going to be a massive part of the audience that will have no memories of the original show, which was fine by us, but to have committed to just a parody seemed tricky at best. And so now let's just take the elements that were there and then have our own good time at sort of reconfiguring. So, of course, the original series, for any of those people that remember, it was Marshall, Will, and Holly, but that was a dad and 2 kids. The great thing is
that's not going to work today.
It ain't going to work. Well, it's also not going to, because Will could be a dad, but he couldn't have a 17-year-old kid who looked like David Cassidy. It's not going to fly. So we were like, okay, that ain't going to happen. But actually, it was very freeing because we decided, okay, well, Marshall, and the original show was fascinating, was that you just never, as a kid, the guy kind of had a uniform on. I didn't know if he was a park ranger. I didn't know if he was a janitor. I didn't know what he did. He just was in a raft with his kids on a routine expedition, whatever that means. And so we worked backwards and thought, well, okay, in our case, let's make Will's character the true celebrity paleontologist, as if there was such a thing, and let his hubris be such that when he gets just knocked down fast at the top of the movie, he's reduced to doing field trip tours at the La Brea pits, has absolutely no self-confidence left, even though there's. And so our Holly then, which was April, became this young woman, not a daughter, but actually a doctoral student from Cambridge, who's probably the only person who believes in the guy. And then McBride, to round it out, the Will character was going to be basically McBride, who runs a very sketchy roadside attraction out in Palmdale, where they unfortunately realize this is the location where they think there is a possibility of a time portal. So he just gets dragged along for the ride by accident.
Right.
And so it was more about create the right chemistry for a road movie. 3 characters that will give you in how their relationships play out the most mileage. And Will's amazing in the movie because he, at times, is more a straight man to McBride, and it's because he's really playing a need. He plays this guy who really is emotionally damaged and needs so desperately to be proven right that he does this thing in the movie constantly where he's always presenting his credentials to everybody. He's doing it to Chaka. He reintroduces himself to Chaka like 5 times in the movie. Chaka,
That's
Rick Marshall.
classic.
Rick Marshall. Yeah, it's, oh, man.
You know, I know that you've been bombarded with special effects questions, and I'm not going to break that trend. I'm going to ask you a couple of more. But I'm interested in how the special effects revolution influences your work as a director and the other creative talents on the project. And because you mentioned, this goes back to the freedom that artists require to do their best work. And when you're working with someone like a Will Ferrell or a Danny McBride, who I would think would thrive on that freedom, is it challenging when you're working on something that's so loaded with effects to achieve that?
Well, I think it makes it's a smart question because the reality is it could be. And for me, actually, that's part of the excitement and the challenge of directing a movie like this is to absolutely create an environment where it's never a consideration for them, meaning that it never becomes an encumbrance, other than, yes, it's where they have to, like everybody, follow the giant ball and know that that's in the end going to be a T-Rex. But in terms of anything that's going to potentially step on improvisation or a certain degree of freedom, that becomes my job. And if there's one, again, in the freedom category, one good thing about the work experience that I've had is I'm fairly sad now in terms of the ins and outs of what I can get away with and where I can push my effects team to really give myself great freedom. So my goal in the movie was, for example, these days, still for the most part, in many cases with computer graphic characters, if you see a movie, films can be fairly formal in terms of how they're composed and I wanted the film to feel absolutely off the shoulder, like we just were thrown in a situation with these characters, and that you never quite know what's going to make its way into the frame. You don't know where the frame is going to go. The effects houses, when we were kind of going after the bidding process, I said, I'm going to shoot the better part of your work handheld, and it's going to be really crazy, and that's going to be part of your challenge in terms of tracking before we ever do any of the computer work. And to me, that meant I operate the camera a lot, and I enjoy that part of it. And so it allowed me to just keep following where the improvisation would go, to say to those guys, don't restrict yourself, stage yourself in this situation as you wish to. And so in a way, knowing the tools and knowing what's possible gives you a chance as a director to give the actors more freedom. Yeah. So it was great. That plus building sets. I really did not want to do a 300 situation where the bulk of the design was going to be after the fact in the computer, because I do think, especially for comedy, to have actors have an actual environment to work in, to bounce off of, it makes for looser, more connected performances. So we built real significant sets.
And you've got Bo Welch on board this project.
Yeah,
one of the great visionaries. Oh, he's terrific.
Well, and has such an inherent sense of humor, and he was a great partner too. He was not familiar with the original show, so for him it was a very enjoyable acid trip, because we loved kind of just, we obviously went above and beyond the original show. I had a small piece of jungle and then the home cave, and the rest were sort of a little bit of scale models, and we wanted it to feel like all the strangest elements of Earth, not just pure fantasy environment, but Earth just mashed up, and both is just fantastic.
Right. So this is a big movie. It's your baby, and it's coming around the corner, the release. I'm wondering how you're feeling right now about it.
I'm feeling, it's really interesting. I was on the phone with Marty Krofft this morning, who he's like Papa Hen. He's always checking in. How you doing? How you feeling? How we going? And I feel great, not only because I'm done, which it's always that usually that you have to get to the finish line and make sure you have all your limbs on your body. Right. And in this case, what I'm really thrilled about last night, because I just got off the dub stage 2 days ago and looked at the lab last night at my first D-Cinema presentation, because we're going to be going out digitally as well as on film. And I had a blast, and that's the one thing about the movie that has been true from the first day. I mean, the movie is just completely psychedelic. It's very much my sense of humor, and it's just an enjoyable experience. And so I'm really excited to have audiences get to see it, because I'm proud of the end result.
Now, are you going to sneak into some theaters opening weekend?
Indeed, I'm gonna start sort of half around the world. I'm jumping on a plane tonight to go to Australia with Will, and we're gonna go and sneak into a little bit of the Aussie experience to see how it goes over. And I will definitely be poking my head around, because it is without giving too many spoilers, there's some crazy sequences in this movie, and from the couple of preview experiences we've had, I've never been in a theater for one of my films there's some just pretty explosive audience moments that are pretty fun.